Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of theCorbettReport.com. He's also an editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's talking to us from Japan, where he has lived and worked since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me back. Always a pleasure to be here.
Well, we just started off our private conversation just before we hit the record button, talking about what might be one of the world's worst publicity incidents. Poor doctor getting kind of beaten up and knocked out, being dragged off United Airlines. Have you seen a public relations disaster as bad as this anytime recently?
It's hard to think of one, and certainly I think United's going to end up with a black eye from this. I mean, we've had problems with exploding smartphones and various problems with car manufacturers and airbags and things like that, but this has to rank up there as one that's going to leave a black eye on the corporation.
Well, I can think of one thing that was pretty bad back in the late 70s when we had glass 2-liter pop bottles that were tipping over, exploding and maiming people. One of the people cut up by one of those exploding Pepsi bottles was singer Anne Murray. So almost like Michael Jackson's hair catching fire during a Pepsi commercial. But that's the last time I remember. I guess, yeah, Samsung's exploding phones. That's pretty bad as well.
It's not going to help them anyway, and I think certainly United is not going to come out of this, no matter what they do at this point and how they choose to rectify this situation. I don't think there's any way to avoid the publicity and the potential knock-on effects that this incident is going to have on the industry generally.
And how has this played in Asia?
Well, there hasn't, I don't think there's been a lot of coverage of the incident specifically in Asia other than as the kind of gawking news piece, but it certainly has made its way around the internet, and that's obviously where I've encountered it over here in Japan. So it's something that's people have in mind, and I don't believe I've ever, I may have flown United once or twice in my life, but I would probably go out of my way to avoid it in the future, not just based on this incident, but all of the bad press they've received over the years. So I think they definitely have their hands full trying to dig themselves out of this hole, and the CEO's initial release about this incident didn't help matters at all.
President Trump meeting with the Premier of China last week in Florida. How has that played out in the Asian media?
So this was obviously something that a lot of people were looking forward to, not necessarily in a good way. A lot of people were dreading what might come of this. You had prominent Chinese businessmen and others talking about the possibility that this was going to elicit or begin the actual trade war between China and the U.S. So a lot of people were very worried about what might happen. Of course, during the summit itself was when we saw all of the craziness break out with the Syrian strikes and all of that. So I think that diverted a lot of attention. But ultimately, what seems to have resulted from this is some sort of accord. I don't think that we really have a good sense of what this means, but some sort of accord between China and the U.S. over countering the North Korean nuclear weapons testing and missile testing. And as a result of that, in some sort of quid pro quo, although this is, again, a bit speculative, but certainly Trump is now coming out and saying, all of those many, many times on the campaign trail that I promised that I was going to label China a currency manipulator, and remember how I put it in my contract with the American voter for that 100-day action plan to make America great again? It was in that section called 7 Actions to Protect American Workers, and it was the number 3 one. I will direct the Secretary of the Treasury to label China a currency manipulator. Guess what? Not so much. He's now saying, no, they're not a currency manipulator. So it seems that there's been a bit of quid pro quo went on. And I think, if anything, it looks like after this, the dust has settled on this first summit, it looks like people who are dreading the coming trade war may at the very least have to delay their schedule for that trade war, because It looks like the U.S. and China are starting some kind of rapprochement, and it looks like North Korea may be the nexus for that.
Trump has said if China doesn't help solve the North Korean problem, he will do it personally. Does that make people scared?
Of course it does, because we all know what that means, and of course the U.S. has just sent an quote-unquote armada over to threaten North Korea. So I think everyone takes this very seriously, and it's a particularly worrying window of time right now, because we're coming up to the big celebrations or festivities or whatever is going on in North Korea over the anniversary of the country's founder Kim Il-sung's birth on April 15th. And the word is that foreign journalists in North Korea have been told to prepare for a big event later on today here on this side of the dateline on Thursday, April 13th. No word on what that is, although there were no indications that this was going to be directly linked to the nuclear weapons program or any of the military tensions. But at any rate, when North Korea is making announcements that people should prepare for a big and important event around a momentous 105th birth anniversary celebration like this, in a time of heightened tensions, I think everyone's on edge. And if there's something major that's going to develop in North Korea, it may just be this weekend where we see it happen.
Well, yeah, I could easily imagine if Trump decides to really go rogue here, he could order a drone or missile strikes on the area where the leader of North Korea is holding his rally.
It absolutely could happen. I wouldn't, I suppose, rule anything out. I'm not sure that would be the way that this would play out, but it would be an interesting development. Whatever happens, I think China's stake in this is that they are obviously worried about the potential collapse of North Korea and what that would mean for, say, millions of refugees, very starving and poor refugees flooding across their border, and also, of course, what it means for the potential for the U.S. military and the South Korean military to basically inch directly up to their doorstep and take over North Korea. That would, again, be something that China would be very nervous about. So they have an interest in making sure that things don't collapse that way. But if you're right, if the U.S. decides to act unilaterally, we've certainly seen them do that in the past.
Now, maybe people aren't aware that the capital of South Korea, Seoul, is only 50 kilometers or so south of the North Korea border. It wouldn't be hard for them to even use long-range artillery to hit them.
Absolutely right. I think people don't have a good sense of that geography, but you're right. Seoul is not very far from that border, and that's why an invasion of Seoul has been one of the events that have been planned and war gamed out many times over the half-century plus now of the armistice in the ongoing North-South Korean War. The Korean War never ended, so people should keep that in mind. And yes, that is certainly one of the possibilities. That also, I think, should give people pause for thought for any thought of any sort of nuclear action on the peninsula, whether coming from the North Koreans or coming from the U.S. South Korea, which does have nuclear armaments trained on North Korea. That would basically be a death knell for most of the Korean peninsula in general. There's no magical line that divides the North and South Korea in some, physical sense. It's just a line on a map, and it's a very, very short distance to Seoul. So I think that should worry a lot of people that a nuclear event of any sort on the peninsula would basically affect everyone on the peninsula.
And doesn't China look at North Korea as a buffer zone between them and the West as well?
I think that's exactly how we have to understand their participation in the Korean War, for example, where they sent a lot of troops in to make sure that the North Koreans were able to fight back and fight back down to the 49th parallel. It was absolutely important. I don't think that's the Canadian border, but that's absolutely what their involvement in the original Korean conflict was about, and that's certainly their stake in it right now. And that's why so many of the military aggressions that are aimed supposedly at North Korea are simultaneously also aimed at China, and China is aware of this. For example, the new THAAD anti-missile system that just went in South Korea, the Chinese take as a direct threat against China, which is where obviously that's pointing as well. Just because they're saying it's for North Korea doesn't mean that that's what it's really all about. So I think the North Korean conflict has to always be seen as essentially a China-U.S. conflict proxy.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
I'm Bill McWilliam, President of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Taiwan property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, OPEC has said it plans to continue its freeze, perhaps, for another 6 months when this current freeze on production ends. How is oil consumption doing in Asia right now?
There's no significant decrease. So I think supply is maintaining, but demand is maintaining, but supply has had some interesting moves in recent weeks. For example, we just had an unexpected draw in crude that was actually a result of a very interesting series of events that ended with the revelation of a surprise build in crude and smaller than expected draws in gas and distillates, which led to, surprise, surprise, not only oil maintaining, but in fact going up. And of course, as a result of that, we saw, on top of that, I should say, we saw the Syrian strike action, which boosted prices back up. I'm sorry, I think I misspoke there. Prices fell as a result of the glut in supply that was recently revealed in WTI RBOB indexes. And then, as a result of the Syria strikes, we see price recovering. So there's actually been a stabilization in oil price, even though we've seen some drastic moves down and up. But I think demand is maintaining, but supply, if anything, is in fact, as I say, there's a glut coming back on the market, even despite these cuts that have been promised or starting to be affected by OPEC.
With the BC election declared, Premier Christy Clark, representing the Liberals, again has mentioned liquefied natural gas, although not to the extent she did in the last election because nothing happened between then and now. What is the Asian demand for liquefied natural gas? Have all the contracts been fulfilled, or could they use more?
Well, I think certainly, speaking from the Japanese perspective, LNG is extremely important in the Japanese context. Obviously, with most of the nuclear reactors in the country still shut down, that has been really the lifeblood of the Japanese energy import economy for the last several years, and there's really no slowdown in that. In fact, in January, Japan imported 8.3 million tons of LNG, which was an increase of 1.06 million tons from January 2016. So, and on top of that, the cost has also increased by 6.7% over the last 2 years. So even despite rising costs, there's still a growing demand for LNG in Japan. And of course, that's, as I say, related to the energy situation in Japan generally. But I think that shows there's certainly still room for more LNG imports in the Asian markets.
Still some hope for BC to get in there too, then.
Yes. In fact, there's one analyst at Eclipse that is predicting that Japan's LNG requirements could reach 77 million tons by 2020. So that's an awful lot of slack that somewhere like BC could certainly fill in.
That's a lot of gas.
It's an incredible amount, and depending on what the nuclear industry ultimately shapes up being here in Japan post-Fukushima, it could remain that way for a very long time to come.
We're not hearing anything at all in the media about Fukushima. What's happening with that melting down plant?
Well, I mean, nothing has fundamentally changed in the actual situation of the reactors. There was some stories that were reported about a month ago about the record radiation that was discovered in the reactor 2, I believe it was. But that was a bit of, not misreporting, but misleading reporting, where they were claiming there was a radiation spike that was never before seen levels of radiation. But really, that was basically the fact that they were getting camera footage from closer to the actual core of the reactor than they'd ever had before. So, of course, they were reading higher readings than they had before, 530 sieverts per hour, which would be enough to kill anyone in a matter of minutes. However, of course, that's because these instruments were approaching the core, which we know is melted down, and somewhere there, they don't know exactly where and how it's lying and how much melted through what and, what level of containment it's in. But at any rate, that's why they're starting to record some of these higher readings. So it wasn't a spike per se. It was just people getting closer to the core. But ultimately, again, that the whole point of this is that the possibility of cleanup, which they've been talking about for a long time and trying to hype, is as distant today as I think it's been at any point. And the idea that this is ever going to be fully cleaned up and taken care of, at least in our lifetimes, is looking less and less likely, because the technology to even get near these melted down cores still doesn't exist, let alone how they're going to actually deal with cleaning it up. So I think that, again, the major point here is a huge PR effort that's going to be undertaken for the next 3 years to make sure that by 2020 Tokyo Olympics, people aren't talking about Fukushima. And then after that point, I would imagine there's going to be a bunch of revelations that come out about what's really happening at the site.
Does it look like Tokyo will have robot cabs operating by 2020?
They're certainly planning on it, and it's not just Tokyo cabs. It's basically every part of the economy is trying to get involved in this. But for example, there's an interesting story up on Reuters today talking about how Japan automakers look to robots to keep elderly on the move, and it's about how corporations like Toyota and Honda are transitioning into robotics manufacturers. In fact, there's a quote from the Toyota Frontier Research Center chief who says, if there's a way that we can enable more people, elderly people, to stay mobile after they can no longer drive, we have to look beyond just cars and evolve into a maker of robots. So they're already starting to talk about, obviously, the demographic crunch coming here in Japan, which by 2065, they're looking at a 30% reduction in the population of the country. And that means a lot of elderly people and not very many children. So they're looking, how can we cater to this market? They're already starting to talk about transitioning car makers into robot makers to help with making robots to assist people around and things like this. And this is, again, coming in the next decade. So I think we're going to see a substantial shift that's coming in. It's Toyota and Honda and companies like that are trying to spearhead all of this. And so it's not just self-driving cars. It's what do you do when people aren't driving cars? Well, you can help them make robotic legs and things like this.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, Japan and Bitcoin. What has happened there?
Japan has finally cleared the hurdles to make Bitcoin an officially spendable currency in the country. Of course, that means that it now has to comply with various regulations, and of course, all of the Bitcoin exchanges are now heavily regulated and have to follow know your customer rules and all of that. So the idea of the sort of decentralized and not getting around government strictures and all of that's at the heart of the ethos of Bitcoin has been circumvented, but on the plus side, you can now use it to pay for a cup of coffee if you want, at least theoretically. So as a result of that, we've seen the first major announcement I saw was Bic Camera, which is basically like a Best Buy type of electronics store here in Japan. It's a pretty major chain, and they are now offering Bitcoin payments in a couple of their flagship stores in Tokyo, and with plans to roll it out across the country. There are other manufacturers of payment systems that incorporate a bunch of different ways to pay, like Apple Pay and things like that, that are now starting to talk about adding Bitcoin. So it looks like Bitcoin may become a real viable currency here in Japan, and as a result, we've seen the price of Bitcoin spike $100 over the past week. It's now back up to where it was in mid-March before we saw it clawed back a little. It's over $1,200 again, and again heading towards parity with gold.
Is Toshiba on shaky financial ground?
That one, I'm going to have to defer on that one. I don't know about the latest Toshiba reports.
Taiwan says it's going to ban the sale and consumption of cat and dog meat. Was that ever a big issue?
It's certainly a big issue on the international scale. What that means locally is a different story, perhaps. But at any rate, it's an important announcement, and it is, I think, a sign that Taiwan is obviously looking for more international investment and international understanding and accord. So for those who don't know, basically this is about an Animal Protection Act that was just passed in the Taiwanese parliament, and it's now imposing as much as an $8,300 fine on people who purchase cat and dog meat. So it's a major step, I think. But again, whether it's more for international optics or for the people of Taiwan, I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, yes, I know what it used to mean when they asked, how much is that doggy in the window? And
exactly.
Do you want that here to go? James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show, for our guests, or for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.